More like this, as I declare you so, all the Tinubu and Atiku supporters, all that they cry hot tears now. As the be say, latest election poll will just come out this afternoon, so don't see show say Peter Obi now the lead for this election they come so. I don't want to talk too much when I watch the video by myself because they give all the breakdown and all the details concerning this latest poll. So as you watch them, Obedient family, I don't know work normally now. Just to share the video, just to share and make everybody they see this up. When I watch the video.
It's down to the wire now, isn't it? 3 weeks to the great political clash, and the latest prediction is that the race for the title will be incredibly tight. The tightest, in fact, in Nigeria's political history. That forecast is contained in a nationwide face-to-face opinion poll conducted by Next Year at the end of January. Significant because it was conducted in both urban and rural communities in all the states in Nigeria, and only registered voters who have collected their PVCs were polled. There were 3,000 respondents, and that sample size generated an error of 2% at a 95% confidence interval. The respondents were asked to select their preferred party using the party logo, and there was one question on favourability using the names of the front-runner candidates. The Labour Party's Peter Obi secured the highest voter preference, but the poll also showed that he's unlikely to secure 25% of the votes cast in 2/3 of the states. And the same applies to the other leading candidates. So the poll concludes that the presidential election looks likely to end in a runoff between Peter Obi and either Atiku Abubakar or Bola Tinubu. So, how accurate is this survey? Well, to help us understand it further, I'm joined now in the studio by the public policy analyst, Patrick Okibo III, founding partner at Next Year, the Africa-based international development consulting firm that conducted the poll. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Charles.
So this fresh poll conducted by your firm Next Year shows the Labour Party leading by 37%, followed by the PDP with 27% and the APC with 24%. And according to the poll, Peter Obi has the greatest net favourability among the leading presidential candidates, ahead of his closest rivals, Atiku Abubakar and Bola Tinubu. Briefly, tell us how you arrived at those calculations.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having us, or having me. I mean, this is a standard opinion poll. And what do? You select a representative sample and you send enumerators out there to conduct the polls and ask questions of people. And we had a structured questionnaire they used. Now, the question people raise about polls, and it's not just this poll, but polls generally, is how can you use like 3,000 respondents, to get a sense for the views of 200 and something million people? And it's basic sampling, right? So the way to understand sampling, the way Gallup helped us to understand sampling is, he said, if you were to figure out if a pot of soup was too salty, do you have to eat the entire pot of soup to know? He said, no. All you need to do is stir the pot very rigorously, and you take a spoon. And that spoon should be representative. So what did we do? We looked at the population numbers in Nigeria, we looked at the number of registered voters, and we created a sample size that had quotas for age groupings, male and female, and registered voters per state. And we sent out our enumerators who to rural and urban local government areas, and I can get into the definitions of all of those, and they randomly selected people within those age groups, age range, and gender to poll. And one of the first questions was, are you registered to vote, and do you have your PVC? If the answer is yes, then the rest of the questions were asked. So it's a sample size of 3,000. Another question we've gotten is 3,000. Shouldn't it be up to 50,000 at least? Is that how it's done in other parts of the world? And the answer is that the biggest polling companies in the world, Gallup, Ipsos, and so on, typically poll anywhere between 1,000 to 1,500. But that's in America or in Europe, right? Where you've got a lot of data sets that allows you to do your sampling and pick that spoon that represents the population. Because we don't have that much data set here, we decided to expand it to 3,000 to ensure that we got a reasonable sample.
Yeah, but what about that if that pot of soup has little bits in it that are partitioned in different groups? You see what I mean? You would have to take samples from each partition, wouldn't you? And the question remains, I mean, you're just talking about people who are registered to vote who have their PVCs.
Correct.
I mean, within that group of people who have it, I mean, you've got different, I mean, you mentioned age, but you've got different, I mean, people, rural people, urban people, you know, educated people, illiterate people, and all the rest of it. So you've got quite a mix there, haven't you?
Okay, so that's why I said, take that pot of soup. It's got chunks and clusters, break it all up, yeah? And stir it around, and whatever you take represents the pot of soup. So the question here is, how did we break it up, right? So you use data that's available. You use population data, you use some MBS data, and Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, and then you use INEC data. And you mix it all up, and some of the numbers that we put out, you see that we had the different age groupings, the number of votes that each of the candidates got in the different age groupings in the different states, by gender, by rural, and by urban. Yeah. So you randomly select, you have a pool of urban local government areas and rural local government areas, and you have those pools, and you randomly select from the urban and the rural so that you get a good spread. You do not necessarily have to go to every local government area to get a sample size that is representative of what every other person feels. No polling company, what its name, talks to everybody to get their views. That would be almost the same as drinking the entire pot of soup.
Well, I'm going to come to the issue of the objections that have been raised about the poll and the questions that have been raised. But let's just get the main points, main findings out of the way. Beyond the candidates, your poll also shows that among the major political parties, the Labour Party has the greatest net favourability. Is that right?
Correct.
Right. And also that neither Peter Obi nor the other leading candidates are likely to secure an outright victory.
Correct.
Tell us a bit more about that.
Okay, so net favorability there's a bit of a mathematics to it, but it's basically you ask people question on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you favor this candidate or this party? And they would pick, and net favorability is calculated as the positives less the negatives, and it gives you a figure. And what we're saying is that in all of that, Peter Obi turned up at, I think it's plus 15, and the rest of them did less. Same thing for the Labour Party. It is instructive because it says that's where the people's mind is, that's what they're thinking, right? In terms of the votes, again, remember, this is a dipstick point-in-time assessment of voters' preferences. The votes we got for each of the candidates, none of them secured 25% in 2/3 of the states plus Abuja. And that gave us that conclusion that this would probably go to a runoff.
Right. But I suppose the big question, and I'm sure you've been asked this many times, is whether your poll can be trusted, especially as it appears to kill off the chances of success in terms of the number of votes of the two biggest parties, the APC and the PDP, which have dominated Nigerian elections in the recent past.
I think those are the wrong questions to ask, right? The correct question is to look at the methodology. Does it pass, the test that for generations, for centuries, social science has been built on? If it does, then the next question is, what does it tell us? So what I expect that the political parties should be asking now is, can we get access to your data? Because we want to see what it says in the different locations to figure out what we're going to do in the last 3 weeks or so to the elections.
Well, given that they haven't asked you that question, let me ask you, because you mentioned the issue of methodology.
Correct.
In terms, I mean, you already talked about your sample size, which is 3,000. Your sort of critics have suggested that may not be properly representative of the millions of Nigerian voters. The APC said they did their own poll, had a sample size of 38,000. I mean, as you said, obviously higher numbers don't necessarily denote accuracy. It's all about whether your sampling is right, isn't it?
Is representative.
Yeah, but I'm curious to know about other things such as bias, I mean, how much did that enter into it? Because, as you said, you've got enumerators going out there with their own prejudices, and enumerators are the keepers of the roll, aren't they?
Okay, so we've been in the polling business since 2018, yeah, and we support, we're the Nigeria rep for a polling company, and we poll in very difficult parts of Nigeria, Niger. We're about to get into Mali and Burkina. And the individuals, who conduct these polls for us have been trained and used multiple times in conducting polls, and they understand why polling must be handled with integrity, right? So there are no fears of them allowing their bias or prejudice to inform the choices that they put forward. Second of all, the polling app we use allows us to geolocate the enumerator wherever he is. And we watch the feedback come in real time. And remember that there are some questions in there that are open-ended questions. So if you detect a pattern, you would know, right? So I don't think there's any bias coming from our enumerators, but I'll give you something. There's something we're beginning to call the Trump effect, right? All the polls predicted that Hillary Clinton was going to win, but Trump won. What happened? It was because at the time, it wasn't acceptable to say that you supported Trump. If you said that, you appeared to be less progressive. So you could have that, especially as we worked with young people as pollsters, that maybe when they approached someone, you look at them, okay, maybe these guys, they're young, maybe they want you to say something about a particular candidate, and you probably will give up that candidate. It is possible. But I think to the greater extent, that bias is managed because the people we work with are trained, and we have worked with them for many years.
And that's why you've got the 2% in there.
Although there's a mathematical calculation on invert of the square root of the n gives you the error margin.
But I'm sure you've seen and heard the reaction to this latest poll by the APC, for example. They called it, and I'm quoting them, intensely partisan. They described it as ludicrous, farcical, and wishful thinking. What's your reaction to that?
I'll beg not to join issues with any political parties. I'm not a politician. I'm a policy analyst. I would rather focus on the facts of the poll rather than joining issues with anybody. Anybody can share whatever opinions they want, but just to say, maybe the right thing to do is to say, Patrick, here's an email address, send us your data. Let's take a look at it. Send us your methodology. In fact, stop by and look at the back end and look at all the locations where we polled, because it will help you. And we're offering it to all the political parties, right? If we were working for one political party, we would not make the data available. All the political parties are polling, by the way. None of them has shared their polls. But we're saying, come look at what we've done. And, we get a sense that what we're finding may be consistent with what some of the other political parties are finding.
Well, I have to say that they said that you are a member of Peter Obi's Presidential Campaign Council and an active campaigner for him. Are you?
No, that's fantastic, because I'm not aware of this. If I'm a member, I'd like for somebody to send me my sitting allowance, which I suspect they pay members. But that's a by the way joke. I have no idea who's part of the campaign council. I am not a member of any campaign council. My job as a founding partner of a leading policy advisory firm in Nigeria is to know things. And it means that I have relationships with across board. Some of my closest friends are in the PDP Presidential Campaign Council, people I go on family vacations with. Some of my closest friends work for Kwankwaso. Yeah? Some of my friends are in the APC Presidential Campaign Council. So, and do I know the people in the... Yes, I do. It is my job to know people if I'm playing in the policy space. But that doesn't mean I'm a member of any campaign council.
Okay. Well, nevertheless, your poll also shows Peter Obi as the preferred choice of voters in the 6 states in the Southwest.
4 states.
4 states. I mean, that sounds very difficult for people who are from those areas, to believe. And it's led to accusations that your firm, as I said, next year is working for Peter Obi. How would you counter that accusation?
So if we didn't do this poll, and you had asked me, who would you give the Southwest to? I'll probably say the APC, right? Who would you give Adamawa to? I'll probably say the PDP. Delta State, PDP. But that's not what we're finding. That's not what we're finding. What we're finding is that Labour Party did well in 4 of the states in the Southwest. And we've gone beneath the numbers to look. And what we're finding is that what could be driving it is the young voters and the Christian voters. We've looked at Adamawa, we've looked at Plateau, we've looked at Benue, and we're finding that same consistent pattern. And that is what I think political parties should be paying attention to. That there's probably something happening that hasn't popped up in other elections, that's popping up now. So I am as well surprised by the findings. But like, I expect anyone with an analytical mind is to go and say, what's going on here?
Well, you've made that point. We've got about a minute left. What are the other things, briefly, that stood out from this poll in your assessment? Things like voter turnout, for instance.
Voter turnout very high.
Right.
About 63% of the people said they're definitely going to vote. 77% said they will likely vote. There are issues around how people pick information or who informs them. But about 83% said they're definitely not going to change their minds, right? And what I thought would be high is who informs your choice. I thought we would see traditional rulers, religious leaders, and my leader, which was one of the options. But all of those averaged out at about 2%. And what stood out was social media, especially WhatsApp and radio. So again, the political parties should be paying attention to social media and radio as a way to get their message out.